All right, back in the garage talking about computation next to my bikes. This is pretty good. So I said computation. This is about John Searle and John Searle's Chinese room argument. And John Searle's Chinese room argument is a direct counter argument to um, Alan Turing's claim in the imitation game and all of this. It is just sort of stunning. Again, I'm stripping all of this down. I am stripping Searle's down. I'm going to not talk about strong AI versus weak AI and all of these sorts of things. I'm going to bring it down to just simply the Chinese room argument and the fallout of that, and leave you in a position of trying to figure out which one's right. Is Searle right? Is Turing right? All of these sorts of things. And it's a hard one. I mean, this debate is played out in conferences and in papers still today. It's still fought. Fought's a little harsh word to use there, but it's bantered, I guess, is a good way. All right, so Searle's Chinese room argument. I'll just get to it, and here it is. So Searle asks us to imagine a human being, him, in a room, and he's in there in the room. That's better. He's in there in the room. And inside of the room with him is a rule book. And in the rule book, there is a whole bunch of Chinese characters. And my apologies to anybody who knows the Chinese language. I'm going to put some squiggles up here to represent the Chinese language. And those are awful, but that's all I got. So the rule book is full of these Chinese characters, and that it sort of says something like this: if you see this Chinese character, output this one, something, right? It's a whole rule book full of those. Other important thing is the person in here is a native English speaker. That's all they speak is English. Now, Searle asks us to imagine something. Could that person really sort of learn Chinese? Could they really do it? It's one thought, right? Now, keep going with the Chinese room argument. Outside of the room, there are actually native Chinese speakers. And when I say native, I mean that is their first language. They were adopted into it. You know, that's what they have. I'm a native speaker of English. You might be a native speaker of another language, or more likely English, because America, right? Yeah. And so what's going on here? The native Chinese speakers, what they do is they pass little notes in to the Chinese room, into there. Searle, the person in here, then goes into the rule book, sees all the squiggles on the note, and then outputs something with a bunch of squiggles on it. Yeah? Now, this is the input. Here's the rules. Here's the output. Now, my question for you, and the question that Searle brings up, is what's the difference between this person and these people? What's the difference here? And Searle has an answer, and it's fascinating, and it's really interesting. Searle's answer to that question is that the difference between the person in the room and the native Chinese speakers outside of the room is that the Chinese speakers outside of the room actually understand the language, whereas the person inside of the room doesn't understand Chinese, right? That when the person inside of the room, the native English speaker, is given that input of the Chinese characters, they go, they match it up with the rule book, they look, they say, okay, when you have this squiggle, output that squiggle, and they could carry on a conversation, right, for quite a while. I mean, it takes a while to process, but they could do it. But that there's a difference between these two. And the difference is that the people on the outside of the room, the native Chinese speakers, actually understand the language, whereas the person inside, the English speaker, doesn't. And so this is the claim that he uses to argue that mental states are not functional states of the brain, because the Chinese room passes the Turing test. You would never be able to tell the difference if there was a machine or a human being in there. This passes the Turing test. However, the difference, one more time, is that the Chinese speakers outside of the room actually understand the language. Okay, I'm going to stop here, and I want to come back to this point about understanding the language, and we have to get clear on what a language is, believe it or not, to get at this. Okay.